Welcome to Innovator Insights, where we explore the minds shaping the future of tomorrow's leaders. In this episode, Scott sits down with George Couros, an innovative teaching, learning, and leadership consultant, and the author of The Innovator's Mindset and Innovate Inside the Box. We'll hear how George got his start in education, the unexpected turns that led him to champion new approaches, and his thoughts on creating meaningful change for both teachers and students. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Innovator Insights podcast. I'm Scott Fisher. On today's episode, I'm pleased to have as a guest innovative teaching, learning, and leadership consultant, public speaker, and author George Couros. Hey, George, let's start off with you telling me a little bit about yourself, maybe what inspired you when you were a student or as a young professional.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm always an honor to be invited to other people's spaces. I actually I got into education later. I don't want to say too late. I actually had a degree that honestly I couldn't do anything with, at least at the time. And kind of just I was like, I'm going to try education. I'm not like one of the people that, knew when I was 5 years old, I wanted to be a teacher or anything like that. And I was about 25 years old when I started, and I actually applied for a kindergarten position. And I remember and that's what I trained to become. And I remember in the interview, they kept asking me about a website I had created in college. And so they kept asking me, and I thought this is like kind of a weird frame of questioning for a kindergarten position. But they actually called me later that day and said, "Hey, you're a great interview, but we've decided to go with someone else." And it was like kind of interesting because I thought I had a really good interview, but I also didn't understand the questions. And about 2-3 weeks later, I called them and I said, "Hey, I'm new to the profession. I want to see it, really improve in what I'm doing. Is there any feedback you'd have for me on my interview?" And they responded with, "Actually, we loved you, and we have a high school technology job that we didn't know was open, and we wanted to offer you that. We're actually going to call you today." And I was like,
That's great.
"Oh, yeah." And so it's funny because I made a website barely in college, and having that little bit of technology knowledge at that time was a lot of knowledge. So they just pegged me right away to do that. So I went from, planning to become a kindergarten teacher to high school technology, not really knowing what I was doing. So I actually just walked into class. I'd be there a little bit earlier before the students, and I would have to learn everything I was about to teach them about a week prior. And, funny enough, at that time, I took the job because it was so hard to get teaching jobs. Now it's not the same,
Right.
but, it's pretty easy to get that. But that experience really taught me really how to adapt, how to learn, kind of on the fly and figure stuff out. And that's the thing with technology is you really don't have a choice not to be innovative because everything changes. Like we go on this podcast, we get on this program, and it could be updated from yesterday. So you have to kind of figure it out and kind of, work things on the fly. So that's kind of how I started off. And yeah, and I've been, in education for 25 plus years. I work with schools and districts all over the world, kind of getting them to not necessarily talk about technology, but how to actually embrace change and to leverage it to really create great opportunities, not only for the students, but for themselves. So that's the work I do today.
So, but how did you get? What was the leap to go from where you were in the school? Which, by the way, at that time, just having that little bit of website experience, you were an expert. You were the pro in the building, and you were the go-to guy. But so walk me through going from high school tech teacher to where you are now. I'm sure there were quite a few steps along the way, but you
Yeah,
can.
like it was interesting because that was a 3-month job, and I really wanted to teach elementary. And they said, "Hey, we got a job for you. Like, this is temporary. We already got someone for this position." And then they actually said to me, "Hey, we actually decided we want to just go with you, and we've put that person somewhere else." I'm like, "I don't really want to do this." So I actually I went from a high school technology teacher to a grade 4 teacher who was halftime tech coordinator. I hadn't even had one full year in a school in another school district, and I thought it was a really good opportunity. So there's always little bits of technology that were in my job as a teacher. And interestingly enough, I actually went to become an assistant principal. And the reason I bring that up is because I almost like had a little anti-tech period in my life because what I saw kids doing with it was really kind of going into labs, kind of disengaging with each other, not really creating anything meaningful, but just kind of almost mindlessly going through programs. So I thought, this isn't really a good approach. And then I actually started, I connected with people, through education. My brother, Alec Couros, he's big influence on me too. He teaches actually in educational technology, and they encouraged me to get on social media, Twitter, and I was not really excited about that. But then I started learning, and I started understanding it, how you can use this to actually connect and make learning in a deeper way from my own perspective, not focusing on teaching it, but really on learning it. And so basically, as a principal, I would share things we were doing in our school, really kind of celebrate and highlight, ask questions. And then what happened was people started seeing what we were doing and they said, "Hey, we'd love for you to come speak at our school." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And they're like, "Well, we just love the stuff that you're doing." I said, I guess I could. And they're like, "Well, what's your fee?" I'm like, "You're going to pay me to
Yeah.
do this?" So it's totally accidental. Like it was not intentional at all. And so I accidentally built myself a career, working with schools, working with districts. And I think for me, what I really am trying to be intentional with is how do we actually get kids to understand the opportunities that they have that we didn't, to kind of open these doors up. And one of the things I really challenge schools to think about is that we often push kids to college like that's the only path to success that exists in our world today. But there's so many doors that have opened for our kids, but we're still trying to push them through the same ones. So I think, kind of my experience of doing this accidental, I want to, be really intentional in how we help kids get into that process. So that's kind of how I ended up doing what I was doing today. I would love to say I was a visionary and, had great foresight, but it was like, it seems like everything I've done has been an accident.
Well, that's okay though, because it's all led to the next thing for you,
Right.
and the next thing, and so on. So it's all been a positive experience for you. So that's the way life happens. Sometimes it's not always the way
Yep.
you planned it, but sometimes letting it take its own course is the best way to go. So now, with regards to your approach to innovation, if you will, and
Mhm.
I know, I don't know, you said before, like, you didn't set out to be the innovator, or so to
Right.
speak, but
Right.
you've made some significant contributions as an innovator to the ed space. Okay, was there anything in particular that you found to be like perhaps maybe your first or your most significant contribution when the light bulb went off and you said, okay, maybe a little bit more humbly, you didn't refer to yourself as an innovator, but you knew you had that ability to innovate?
Yeah, like I was actually, so I'd been a principal a couple of years, and then I was asked to work at the central office level to work with the other principals, to work with teachers. And at the time, it was a brand new position. It was basically created for me, and we didn't know what to call it. So per the advice of my brother, he said, "Why don't you call it like innovative teaching and learning?" So I was division principal. That was the title, so I could be seconded, and then of innovative teaching and learning. And what's interesting is we had no idea what innovation meant. It was just something that was said. And it sounded nice, but then part of my job was to like really define what is innovation, what does it mean, how do we get people to embrace that idea if it is something that is meaningful in our work. So through my process, through my learning, we just define innovation. I think a lot of people think innovation has to do with technology, and I would actually argue that. I would actually say technology accelerates everything, including bad practice. So
Yeah.
the example I always give is scantrons, right? A scantron can actually lead to, bad practice, that we can just basically focus more on, grading something quickly, but not necessarily, deepening learning for our students. So through that process, kind of kind of defining that innovation to me is simply doing new and better things. That's it. But it has to be better. It can't just be new. And I think a lot of people get this. And the reason I think why people think it's synonymous with the word technology is because a lot of times we have directors of technology who become directors of innovation because that's like the cool name. But we rarely have, the director of curriculum becoming the innovation person. And I always question why is that, right? Because those are the people who should be really thinking about innovative teaching and learning practices. So, through that journey, I actually ended up writing my first book, Innovator's Mindset, and really talking about that. And it was really kind of focusing on what are some of the timeless things that we do. So, even though it's a 10-year anniversary this year of the book, and people still utilize it all the time. So if you wrote about technology 10 years ago, it would be irrelevant by now. But it was really, how do you get people to embrace change, look at things differently, and really kind of see themselves as the answer to many of the problems that we're facing in education. So I think that to me is, what most people know me for. And it's been something I know it sounds weird, but I really focus on that idea of innovation and continuously developing and modifying and growing myself in this process because, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, we're still going to be innovative, but what that looks like compared to today is going to be different, but that the focus is still the same.
Yeah. You mentioned the point about innovation is often tied to technology, but it
Right.
doesn't always have to be. Okay,
No.
I think it's a different mindset, and that's what through this podcast and some other things I'm doing. That's what I'm really trying to get at with people is what are the commonalities between the people that are innovators or between the innovative approaches to things. So it is great that you point out that it's not always
Mm,
technology based. I did take a chance and look around a little bit and I understand that you're attributed with this quote here, and if I'm wrong, you
sure.
can feel free to
Yep.
correct me. But the technology can be crucial in the development of innovative organizations, but innovation is less about tools like computers, tablets, social media,
Mm,
and the internet, and more about how we use those things. And I think that's sort of what you were talking about
yeah.
a moment ago. But um, can you expand upon that a little bit further for people that maybe aren't as familiar with education and why it's so unique and why that's so important?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. I was just in it with working with Atlanta Public Schools with their gifted teacher program just this past week, and one of the things I do, and I think there's almost this fight between tradition and innovation, where it's actually I'm a big storyteller, which is the most traditional teaching practice of all time. So I tell a lot of stories, lectures, through my
Mhm.
lectures through that. And I actually, through that practice, I share some ideas with them. And then we take a little bit of break so I can kind of figure out what they want to learn. But before we go on a break, one of the things that I do is I actually say, hey, before you go off, I just need you to fill out this quick little Google form. Tell me, what you want to learn and what's a question you have and what's something you want to try moving forward because of that. So they'll actually spend some time filling that out. They'll go off, connect with each other, have a little relaxing time. During the break, I'm actually looking at their questions and redesigning what the rest of the time looks like based on what they're interested in, what they're doing. Now, the thing is, using a Google form or whatever document that you do to gather that information is not the innovation. It's actually how you leverage it, how you think differently about it. So then they come back. And one of the jokes that, I often say is that, hey, I've actually tailored the next part um, of what we're doing based on what you have asked and what your questions are and what you're doing. So if this sucks, this is kind of your fault.
There
So
you go. It's
people
on
always kind
you.
of people kind of appreciate that. But basically, it does not matter where I go. It is tailored to the people in front of me because I've leveraged that technology. So I don't spend any time saying, "Here's how to use this tool." I try to show them value, and I actually walk through. Hey, by the way, did you see how I did this? Here's how I do this. If I was, for example, teaching high school, English this year, or if I was teaching a grade 2 reading class. So I make a really intentional focus on this thing I did with you that you experience. Here's how I do this with teachers. And then, because a lot of times we go to these things, we have very different experiences, but then we don't recreate it for our kids. And so sometimes you have to make that explicit connection. But even that's evolved. I've actually done the same practice with a group that I've been working with over the last 3 years. Every February, I work with Texas superintendents, trustees, and it's a different cohort every year. And whatever I'm talking about, I ask I share some similar ideas, similar thinking, but some new stuff along the way. But then I actually take that reflection. What's interesting, I've been working with the same group for the last 3 years. So now, ChatGPT, AI, way more predominant. I actually took all of their questions from each year. And then in front of that group, I actually just said, hey, I want you to here's the differences between 2023, 2024, 2025. And what are some of the similar questions? What are some of the differences? What are some of the actions that people want to take? And I didn't actually do that in the background and then just show them the information. I actually did it right in front of them. And you should see their minds just blown from
Well,
that
yeah.
too, because they see the connection that, hey, even though they weren't privy to what was happening years prior, they can now see that information, what's going on in education in the state and what that actually looks like. So, kind of thinking about, even though that was something that I started doing, I don't even think the first year I did it, AI was really, all over the place as it is now. But now thinking differently, like, okay, I actually have this information. I've been using the exact same form, super easy to get all the information and actually compare and contrast what people are doing. And so I think for me, when I do some of these things, I don't do it in the background. I do it in front of people. So they start thinking, okay, I love that idea. How would I do that with this? So, and I'm very intentional when I work with them. I'm not giving you a bunch of things you need to do the next day. You're the expert. What I'm trying to do is show you some stuff. You figure out how you use it because I don't understand your context. I don't understand what you're teaching. You're the expert. I'm just a guy sharing some ideas with you. And so, really kind of putting the onus on how they think differently about their practice through the experience of what we have. I think that's where really trying to shape people to think in a different way.
Yeah, and I've always found that to be especially important with teachers, because their approach is different than mine might be as their district administrator, if you will.
Right.
They're always much more creative, and they have a much better way of using something than I did, or a much more creative way of doing it. So, encouraging that or fostering that
Yep.
type of attitude or behavior is really important. And you mentioned that innovation isn't just about change; it's about improvement. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing. Is you're taking what's always been done in a sense, and you're improving upon it, and that's always important to keep people interested, to get them thinking, to get them processing what the potential is, and to move forward and do it in their own way you know
Yeah, we were actually even just this last week. One of the things that I did, I actually told them, I'm like, listen, I'm trying something new. I've never done this before, and it just came to my mind. So might fail. So we'll see what happens, right? So I actually asked them some questions. They had some conversations with each other at the table. And what I actually did is when they were sharing their insights, I actually just walked over with my phone and had them talk. And then I just captured it through text to ChatGPT, each group. And then I basically captured all their answers. And I said, "Okay, can you give me a summary of three takeaways that we've had here? And then three strategies of what we can try moving forward." And it just did it real time. And they were like, and now all of a sudden they're thinking, okay, that'd be a great way to capture what our class talked about, sharing this and what would that actually do, and now create some accountability, because a lot of times we have those discussions, we write them on gigantic pieces of chart paper that either go in the garbage or we never talk about again. But now I can easily follow up, and what's beautiful, I can actually spend more time really thinking deeply about the information as opposed to spending hours and hours trying to like find these gigantic pieces of paper and trying to capture the information that way too. So I think that's like when you're in a space, when you are a leader, you are leading a workshop, you're leading professional learning, the willingness to learn in front of people and try things with some risk encourages them to do the exact same thing, because it's easy to say you need to take risks even though I'm your boss, and if you screw up you're going to be fired. Like, it kind of feels that way sometimes. They got to see you doing that as well.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And when you're working with these groups or these people, is there often a common obstacle to getting them to accept that idea of what it means to be innovative, or how to use an innovative approach to improve what they're doing? Is there any obstacles to that?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. Like, the common obstacle I see a lot of times is leadership. To be honest with you, is like, hey,
Okay.
we want to try this, but we're not allowed to do the A, B, and C. And a lot of times, uh, that's and I fully disclose when I work with these groups, like, I'm here to challenge everybody, including the leadership team that's brought me in. Because if you want people to do innovative things, they can't do it within a culture of compliance,
Right.
and especially with students. So I think that's one of the questions. And I know this is not like an innovative practice, but many people are familiar with smart boards, interactive whiteboards, whatever you had in your school. And the I learned a lesson when I was an administrator. We actually had two portable ones. And if you remember that process, why did we get two portable at the time? Because we didn't really know what we were doing. We wanted everyone to have access. So you could sign out these smart boards, you could move them from class to class to class. And then you'd set it up, you set your projector up, you do the calibration, that 9 point step, whatever. Then some kid would bump your projector, you have to go through the nine, points again. And so the majority of teachers were so frustrated with it, doing it over and over again, that they just said, I'm not doing this anymore. Whereas typically the forward, I wouldn't say forward thinkers, but your early adopters, they are the people that were willing to do that 84 times in a day because they saw value in using that. So when I talked to leadership about that, when we started seeing massive use of those things, and again, this is not innovative practice, but we put money into this. How do we actually get people to see value in it, to leverage it? It's when we started mounting them in the classrooms, and then they don't have to calibrate it over and over and over again. So the reason I bring this up is because when you remove excuses or limitations as a leader, that's kind of the idea behind that, is because you want to remove every excuse, because every obstacle that you put in place in front of your staff, in front of your community, it's more people just kind of saying, I don't, this is useless to me, I don't want to use this. So when you get rid of those barriers, that's when things start to open up. And so that's one of the things I really want to challenge when I work with groups. It's not, a lot of times we say it's the teachers or it's someone else, but we have to look at, somebody said to me once, my teachers, they fight on everything. They won't change. I'm like, maybe it's you. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, your job is to lead, right? So if you're just going to blame them, you're not moving them forward. Maybe instead of doing the approach that you're doing, have you tried something else? Have you tried a different approach with your staff to get them to embrace different things? Because yeah, it might be tough. You might be working with a tough group or whatever. Saying the same thing you said just a little bit louder isn't actually going to
Yeah.
indicate change. It's it's really kind of thinking differently about how do you get people to embrace new ideas.
Yeah, that's very important that you have support from leadership, and you have leadership that's open to not just speaking but listening and understanding what's going on, and to give people a chance. Maybe something will work, maybe it won't, but you don't know if you don't try it. But if you put up all these walls and prevent teachers from doing the things that they're trying to do and to be creative, the results are not going to be great with that. Now, when you deal with particular people and you're dealing with various groups, different levels, and so forth, those that jump out at you as the most receptive to changing things up, improving things, innovating, as we're talking about it, is there are there some common traits that flow through those people, or some things that you see that they all have in common?
No, and in all honesty, I know this sounds weird. I'm more interested in people that are resistant.
Okay.
Because if I'm there and they're already excited before I got there, they didn't really need me for that, right? It's actually the majority of people that are resistant. And I've been really cognizant of my language. I remember actually seeing someone speaking at a conference recently, and it really hit me, something they said, and it really bothered me. And it's such a subtle thing, and so many people agree with it. It was someone who said we need to de-emphasize memorization in education. And in that room, it was like a very tech driven conference audience. And people are like, yeah, that's right. That's right. And I'm like, that's a terrible statement. And the reason why is because you have a group of people that would totally agree with that statement. We need to de-emphasize memorization. And then you actually have a group of people who say, no, actually, you need to know basic skills. You need to be able to memorize stuff. That thing really matters. So so basically what you've done is you've created more of a divide. You don't have the people who are really focused on memorization saying, yeah, you're right, we do. They're like, no, they're actually probably more upset than anything. So one of the things that I focus on is how do we actually develop a deep understanding of the information that we're processing. I'm not saying content's not important. I'm actually saying how do we actually share content, but actually really deeply understand it? Because if you actually have a deep understanding of what you're learning, by default, you will have memorized it. But if you memorize it, doesn't mean you actually understand it. So what does that actually do? It actually gets, no one's going to say no, kids don't actually need to deeply understand content. No one would say that out loud. And I'm sure the majority of people would not disagree with that statement. But then you're acknowledging the importance of actually understanding basic information and memorizing it, but seeing how do we actually go further. But you also challenge the people who are like, yeah, we need to de-emphasize memorization. They're like, well, actually, there are some really important basic skills that every kid should have, so we can go deeper. So it's really kind of thinking about how do you actually not ostracize the group of people that you're trying the most to move forward, because a lot, like, to be honest with you, no one needs to motivate me to try new things. I do that myself. I don't need that. So I'm looking at who are the people that we've almost pushed away because they're not exactly where we want them to be at that moment, as opposed to saying, no, the stuff you're doing is great. There's some real value in it. how do we actually get you to move forward just the same way you'd want your kids to continuously move forward? You want a kid said, nah, I'm not stupid, I'm not learning this. You try to get them to move forward. So I think that's what I'm spending more of my time really being thoughtful in my language. Like even one of the words I'm very cognizant is I used to say, our tradition, once we get, traditional practices, and it's like, well, no, traditional practices are actually pretty powerful, but depending on context. But some really new practices are terrible, but they're new, so they have a shine to them, and
Yeah.
so it really doesn't matter the generation it came from. Does it work for the people you serve? That's the question, right? So there's, like I said, storytelling, most traditional practice ever, and still one of the best ways to actually get people to embrace new ideas because they feel an emotional connection to what you're sharing. So I think that's what we're trying to do is really kind of focus on who are the people that we have typically pushed aside and how do we actually get them to move forward, and also not to kind of trick and manipulate them, but also ensure that the stuff that they're doing that has worked is valued. I think that to me is really, really important.
Now, obviously, AI is the big craze. How do you think that factors into all of that? Is that more likely to be adopted or shied away from by those people that you say that are reluctant, just in general, for change? Like, do you think? I guess what I'm trying to say is, do you think it makes it easier for them to see how change can be easier than they might think it is, or help them?
Yeah, like again, it's to be honest, it's who's leading it.
Okay,
That's part of it too, right?
sure.
So if you're just jumping on the AI bus and just doing it without much thought about it, that's where a disconnect actually happens. What I actually I do these 4 questions that I work with, and this can be AI or anything, any new technology, any new initiative. I actually get people to talk about it first, and I'll say, "Hey, what are some of the negatives of this?" And it's very intentional in how I do this. So, what are some of the negatives? What are some of the positives in that order? Because I actually want people to kind of like, I hate this. This is horrible. This can be the end of civilization, Terminator 2, that kind of thing, right? So, you have that conversation. Okay, what are some of the positives of this? So, that you want to actually have that emotional arc in what they're doing. Okay, so now, how do you see this benefiting you in your personal life? Like, what are some ways you can actually use this? And I'll give you an example. Like, I'm a runner, and it's super easy to actually create very personalized running plans over a week, exactly based on my schedule, as opposed to like I know it sounds weird to say to Google stuff, which now seems slow to actually try to find out that information. You can build something really specific to you. Again, working with that Atlanta group, I talked about, one of the things we need to teach students is really thinking about financial, not literacy, but fluency. How do they actually leverage money? So let's say you teach a kid, hey, I'm going to be making this much money this year. I want to be a millionaire by this age. What are the things that I do? What's some tax savings incentives I need to do as I file taxes? And what was interesting, the teachers all loved that idea for kids, but they started like doing it for themselves. They're like,
Yeah,
oh, right. And so now they're seeing a personal connection to it. And then we talk about how would you use this for professional learning? Like, how would you do this to make your job easier, to make your life easier, to spend more time with students? And then we talk about how we leverage this with students. What a lot of schools are doing, they're jumping right to the students, but then you're getting the pushback, you're getting the challenge. So if you don't actually get people to see value of it for themselves in their own personal lives, they'll never want to teach it to students because why would they? It's stupid, right? But if they're like, oh, this is actually like, I never thought about using it that way, then they see value and then they want to teach it. And I think that's one of the things I'm really kind of, we have like, it's kind of interesting because it's a slower process to get people to embrace change. But what's even slower is them pushing back on you all of the time. Like that, then it's never. And so I think that is being really intentional with this. But it's also kind of acknowledging if we're not thoughtful how we use this, it could actually make us dumber. And I've asked a group many times. I've asked groups this question: are kids better at technology today than we were at the same age? And overwhelmingly, people say, absolutely, kids are way better. I'm like, no, they're not. They're not better in
yeah.
technology. They're actually, the technology is so easy, you don't really have to know that much. And so I give an example. So Apple IIc, to make that thing do anything when I was a kid, you had to know programming skills, like coding, all this other stuff. And then I asked a question and people are like, oh, that makes sense. I said, okay, how many of you remember your first iPhone and the manual that came with it? And a bunch of hands go up. I'm like, you're all lying because there was no
There
manual,
was no
right?
manual, right?
Right. It's a couple buttons, you press them and it tells you what to do. And so it actually is getting, and like I talked with an older gentleman and he kind of pushed back. And I go, I think you're better in technology than I was. And he's like, what do you mean? I said, do you know how to change a tire? He's like, of course I do. I said, I don't. I'd have to get out YouTube. I'd have to go in that space. So if you see like when you see it, and he was so against it, and then when I started talking about that, he's going home to his grandkids. He's like, I'm actually better at technology than you are. But then he sees value, right? Because it's not like, oh, you don't know what you're doing, right? Like there's a really great meme. It's like the next time you are frustrated, teaching your parents how to use a computer or a phone, remember they taught you how to use a fork. It's like
True.
it's pretty kind of understanding. So I think it's really getting people to see value for their own lives, but also not, but understanding that their experience, their wisdom, their ability to solve problems prior to the ease of use of technology is really important. And if we're not thoughtful in how we use this, it can actually make us think less. It can actually make us more disconnected than ever. So I think people appreciate that. And then it's more of a thoughtful approach on how we use this with students because it's not negating that, yeah, this could actually make us dumber if we're not intentional with our usage.
I know there is a group of people in the world that will not believe that there was ever a time that this happened, but there was a time when adults, teaching staff, did not actually use computers. Okay, and it was a new concept to them.
Right.
And
It was 1999 when my first year teaching.
eh, well, so what we had to do then, okay, is we wanted the teachers to use the devices. We wanted them to get
Yeah.
comfortable using it for instruction. Okay, but I get these reports. Oh, they're using it to do personal stuff to do X, Y, Z. And I'm like, so? They're like, what do you mean so? That's not what we're bought for. I'm like, but don't you understand? Now it has value to them. They can see what they need to do with this device. And while they're doing that, they're going to go, oh, I can do something similar in my classroom or base it on that. So we 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 need to not be so quick to shut them down. And along the lines with what you're saying is you don't want to put up these walls for them and uh, and such. It's just a different time now where I think the kids, as you said, they're not necessarily better because they're not being taught how to learn certain things
Mm.
when it comes to the technology. They're just using it, but they're not fully understanding it. Um, and I don't mean everybody. I don't mean to paint with such a broad brush. I just mean to say that like you said, they're not. I guess I'm just repeating what you're saying. They're not better at it. They're just it's easier to use for them.
Totally.
But what I've always encouraged people to do is to learn how to do anything so that whatever device you're using, you can do it.
Yeah.
It's not tied to one thing. I got a little off topic. I'm sorry about that. But in any
Yeah, you
case,
did.
I do want to ask you about looking forward with technology. Where do you see things going? I mean, yes, AI, I get that.
Yep.
But specifically, not even just talking about schools, we've talked a lot about schools today. I know
Yep.
in your writings and things, you talk about organizations and their approach to things, and
Yep.
specifically, we talk about innovation. But let's talk about technology in particular. Um, where do you see it going for everybody? I don't just mean schools, I mean
Yep.
businesses, I
Totally.
mean end users, personal lives. Where do you see us heading with this stuff?
Yeah. So it's interesting because my answer today is the same as my answer 5 years ago, and is going to be the same as my answer 5 years from now. I have no clue, and probably neither does anyone listening to this podcast, right? And that's the reality of this. What I'm focused on is actually how do we help people be able to figure out whatever comes their way. That's what I'm because I don't know. Like no one predicted iPads in schools. Nobody predicted AI to the extent that we're using it in the way that we're using it right now. But you're seeing people that are very comfortable picking up new ideas. That should be how we kind of see the world. So that to me has always been my answer. I honestly have no clue. I don't think really anyone does. You can look at all these future things, and it's interesting when AI came out it was almost as fast as the people who deem themselves as AI experts who went to work with organizations talking about this. And it's like, Like you never mentioned it ever before, and then all of a sudden you just jumped on something. And to me, it's always about how do you ensure people know how to learn, how to adapt. Like that's something that I think is forever. That's never going to change. Is that if you are willing to adapt and grow, and how do you develop yourself as a learner? And I think this is not a school thing, as you kind of alluded to. It's a business thing. It's an organizational thing. If you don't have people who are willing to adapt and try new things, that really matters. And like, if you think about, what are some of the best books of all time? One of my favorites is How to Win Friends and Influence People, Dale Carnegie. I remember reading this book, and it is, I read it maybe 5, 10 years ago, blown away, just loved it. I was like, this is such a good book. When was this written? I looked at it, was in the 1930s.
Yeah.
And it's still timeless. And I think that there's some things that really, really matter. And what I'm looking at right now is the connection between stoicism and AI, and how do we bridge those two things together? Because it's not like these ideas have lasted for thousands of years, except for now. They're going to be long after we're all dead. And so it is saying, like, what matters long term? How do we continuously adapt change? I think Marcus Aurelius was talking about, basically make my mind. I think it was actually Epictetus said, make my mind adaptable to any circumstances. So this is actually in ancient Greece that they're talking about this. That's where we need to focus people, is that no matter the circumstances, how do we continuously adapt and leverage the change that's in front of us?
Yeah, that's going to be the challenge, and you're absolutely right that it's impossible to predict where things are going. So I think you have to take a more shorter term approach. You can't look at 10 months. I mean, in schools we always talk about, we're developing budgets that have to last us
Yeah.
18 months. That's impossible. That's a long
Right.
time. So to look 5, 10 years down the road is even more of a challenge. But um, do you just I guess if you can give me a simple answer, do you think the addition of these AI tools that are, some of them purport to like do the work for you, or
But
I don't know how to, do you think that's an enhancement for the teachers to, or like certainly freeing up time, but do you think that improves instruction ultimately? Or do you think that that's a little bit of a step back, or depends on the teacher?
it just depends on how you leverage it. There's actually, I know it's going to make me sound like I'm 12 years old. There's a really great South Park episode where they talk about AI, and it's fascinating. And it's such a good, commentary on what is happening in many spaces with artificial intelligence. These kids are writing these essays totally using ChatGPT, and the expertise of these kids seems to have gone exponentially. The teacher's frustrated because grading has become so much more complicated because the kid's writing is so much better. So he actually goes home to his partner and he said, hey, like these kids' essays, I can't keep up. It's overwhelming. And his partner says, hey, have you heard of ChatGPT? And he's like, no. He's like, yeah, it actually can take tons of information. So what happens all of a sudden is that the teacher says, I'm going to actually grade the papers with ChatGPT. So basically, the kids are not writing, the teachers aren't grading, nobody's doing anything, and we're just kind of checking the boxes of what we're doing. So I think that's why we're really intentional. Like when I do workshops with teachers, it's like, how do we use this to kind of think deeper, to spend our time? But also, you have to show the process. Don't make lesson plans and make all of this stuff behind the scenes, but then get on a kid for having their essay written by it. Cause like that's something too. Like you have to, this actually should improve it. It's not just replacing this too. And like even on my own podcast, I'll do book reviews, and I've read the book fully. And then I'll say, like, hey, here's some of my comments in the book, but here's a summary as shared by ChatGPT. So I actually reference it, talk about it, but then I'll say, okay, here's 3 quotes that resonate with me and why. And I'll share a quote, and then I'll actually share a very personal story on why that matters to me, which ChatGPT could not provide. So what I'm actually doing is giving some of the stuff that I'm reading, but I'm trying to model too, like how could a teacher use this when a kid's doing this? And instead of saying, don't use ChatGPT or don't use AI, it's like, hey, this is how I would use it, and reference it. So acknowledge where you're using it and where you're not. And what are you actually creating now that maybe you're spending more time really kind of again deeply understanding the content, making some personal connections to it, and then actually taking some of the similar things that every student's going to do, and actually using ChatGPT to connect that information. So I think that's where we got to figure out is my whole thing. And like I see a lot of posters like there's this huge movement to get rid of phones in schools, and I'm not pro phone or anti phone. But now it's like the same person, Jonathan Haidt, is now talking about ed tech is horrible. So I kind of saw that writing on the wall. He's like moving his way toward it, and people are just listening to him, which is amazing because you have someone who's never been a part of schools, but a lot of people agree with him. So now they listen. But I would actually argue that if you don't teach kids how to use it, and it's interesting because Jonathan Haidt, how's he getting that message out? Through Instagram, through
Yeah,
social media. He's
exactly.
leveraging technology to get out his anti-technology views and starting a movement through technology. And so my whole thing is how can someone say to other people, don't use the thing that I've directly benefited from? That's where I'm struggling. Whereas my focus is I have actually directly benefited from. I'm going to teach kids some of the strategies that I've used that have, improved my life, made my life better. Some of the things that I avoid, like I'm very focused on my health. And I know not to look at my email or social media until after I get my workout done in the morning because it could totally ruin my workout or get me distracted. So like, but there's a credibility because I'm not saying don't use it. I'm saying here's how I use it and how I use it well. But I also, have some credibility with this. Someone saying like, "Hey, don't do the thing I'm doing," even though
Yeah.
I'm making a bunch of money off of it.
Yeah.
Probably not the best approach.
Well, I think when it comes to the students, it's also important to model, like you're saying,
Oh,
and to show them. I mean, I'm sitting here, throughout this, my phone's sitting on the desk next to me here. If it went off, I'm not going to answer it. I'm going to keep focusing on what I'm
yeah,
focusing on, and that's kind of what you need to teach the kids too. That just because you have a phone on you doesn't mean it needs to be out of your pocket and searching
right.
social media. But if there's some real usefulness to it, if it benefits you, if it's part of the class or part of what we're working on, then by all means you should have the access to it. So yeah, that's a
Well,
big
it's
debate
interesting you
now.
say that because my phone's been right beside me the entire time, but it hasn't went off once. And it's not because I'm not getting in messages; it's because I am on do not disturb 24/7. I
Well,
never, I only go to my phone if I feel it's necessary to go to my phone. I never let my phone pull it to me. And that's actually a strategy I teach kids that you should not let your phone dictate your actions, but you should go to your phone when it makes sense to you.
no, I agree with that, and I too have mine on silence. But I was trying to make the point that I wouldn't
Yeah,
reach for it to make a call in the middle of it.
yeah.
But no, I agree with you. But
I'll
I
have it
I
on
think
silent
that
after I talk to you too.
yeah,
I
there
have
you
it
go.
silent all day.
All right. So now, in terms of maybe communities of people or platforms that you think have
Yeah.
actually benefited you the most, you've mentioned social media, but are there any in particular that have really that you felt were the best place for you to be with what you're trying to do at this point in your career?
Yeah, like I've connected with teachers all over social media, X, Instagram, Facebook. There's so many different spaces. I think there's just so many different places that people want to go and share. Weirdly enough, the thing that would say has benefited me by far the most is my own blog. And the reason I say that is because I have had a consistent practice of sharing my thoughts with others for probably 15 years. And there is a power in knowing that what you write, other people are going to see. So you better be thoughtful of what you're putting out there and try to understand other people's perspectives. So I think that's one of the ways that I really leverage it. There's no way I would have ever written a book or anything like that. And the sole reason I actually started my portfolio, again, accidental, it was not because I wanted my voice to get out there, wanted to write or anything like that. We were actually implementing digital portfolios with our students, but we were failing at it over and over again because we were trying to teach something we had never done ourselves. So I said, look, if we're going to do this and be successful, I'm going to go first. I'm going to figure out what does this look like? How do we leverage this? What are some of the pitfalls? What are some of the opportunities? And go through that process. So there's a really great quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I know I'm not going to get it exactly. It's from, I think it's Clive Thompson. He says, anyone can win an argument inside their head, but when you have to face an audience, you have to be truly convincing. And so that's something I think about all the time is that what is the argument against what I'm saying? And how do I make sure I address it before it shows up in the comments? Right. Like I want to make sure that I'm like, hey, I'm not saying this. Here's what I'm actually saying. I'm not like, for example, I'm not saying I'm pro phones in the classroom, but also do we think about how we leverage them? So it's kind of like understanding different perspectives. So any space that you actually have time to like just, kind of recreate your thoughts, whether it's, a video, a podcast, something like this, when you know the entire world is has the ability to listen to this, it can make you more thoughtful. It doesn't always, hopefully it does. But that's something that I've really benefited from, and it's kind of maybe pushing back a little bit. We are so focused on collaboration in schools. We're so focused on sharing our voice, but we have no time for internal reflection. We have no time to listen to each other if everybody's talking. So I think to me, it's really spending some time within my own thoughts, which actually makes me better contribute to a group. I mentioned earlier the reason I do that Google form and get teachers to reflect on what they're learning is because a lot of times we say turn and talk, and the same two or three people are talking because they have really quick processing time. Whereas if I give everybody the opportunity to just write some of their thoughts down, it's actually a process called brain writing. It actually helps them better articulate or really, think out what they want to share with the group. So I think when we use this to maybe not connect with each other, but connect with ourselves, that's where some real power comes in.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that, definitely. So what is next for you? Where are you going moving forward, or what do you have planned projects, things of that nature that you're working on you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, well, one of the things I'm working on right now is actually that I mentioned briefly. I'm doing a lot of presentations on this and writing. Basically, the connection between Stoicism and AI and emerging technologies, and it's kind of like what are some of the things that from the past that have really shaped how we think, and that we could actually apply now that 10, 15, 20 years from now, even 100 will still apply, that no matter what the technology is. So I'm really focused on what are the principles we need to kind of focus on that will always keep us relevant, that will always keep us on the cutting edge, but that we've learned from the past. Because I think it's kind of an interesting thing because those are the two camps that exist in our world today. It's like the back to the basics, the old school mentality, and the innovators. And I think there's actually real potential in connecting the two, and they can learn from each other. So that's what I'm really focused on right now.
That's great. It really is. Well, I appreciate you coming in. I have to do this throwaway question I always put out there just because I'm an idiot. Your devices, what do you use? What are your go-to
Uh,
devices?
I am I'm an Apple guy.
Okay.
And now it sucks you in, right? Once you go Apple, there's like everything has to go Apple or it's
Everything.
not going to work, right?
Across the board.
So I got my iPhone, but I like certain things. It's interesting because I present all over the place, and they'll say, "Hey, we're going to project your screen, using Bluetooth." I'm like, "No, no, no! You got to hardwire it in. I need an auxiliary cable for my like sometimes the new stuff is new, but it doesn't work that great, right? And so that's something. It's like an interesting thing. We got this new technology. I'm like, the old stuff worked way better.
Yeah,
So
in
and
some
it's
cases.
like that it's kind of interesting that again people are like, hey, we want the newest thing. The newest thing isn't always the best thing, right? And I think that gleans a lot of my thinking today is that whatever works is what we should be focusing on.
Yes, absolutely. Some of the older stuff does work much better.
Mhm.
When it comes to the students today, is the type of device almost irrelevant, or should it be irrelevant? What type of device they're using, and just the access to the information, it should be what's important, or do you think it matters?
Yeah, like it's funny because I it's like, I have my phone with me. I have my computer with me. And whenever I'm learning, I don't use one or the other. I might write some stuff down. I actually have like these like post-it notes here too. And I go to what makes sense at the moment. And I think that's
Right.
what we got to kind of teach kids is like, hey, like I've never actually seen people take pictures of my slides all the time or they capture video of me speaking. I've never seen them turn their computer around and do it. I've only seen them do it with their phone. But then sometimes I see them doing their phone on the computer or they write notes, right? And then advocating, no, kids should be like, uh, not have a singular device all the time, even though I got three, I'm like a 3-to-1 ratio. So it is like, whatever makes sense in the moment. I think that's what we got to focus on, but it's also what you have access to in front of you. Sometimes I only have my phone. Sometimes I only have my computer. Sometimes I have neither. And, that's okay too. I actually, I do like running with music and, I got cellular on my watch, so I don't even have to take my phone with me. And it, creates a better experience some days. But it's like it's weird because you're like a little terrifying. Like I could not have my keys, not have my wallet, but not have my phone. It's
Yeah, that's a big deal.
right, it's kind
All
of
right,
different.
I'll let you go after this. Just any last bits of advice that you might give someone, just starting out who, um, is conscientiously trying to make that change that we've been talking about, or to be the innovator? Just any simple
Yeah,
guidance for them?
for me, it's always like, especially if you are, in a position of leadership, or if you are a teacher, I'm assuming you're continuously learning, but a lot of times we do that in privacy, we do it in secret, and I've tried to do it in front of people, and I think that really inspires people to try new things, because we think that they're inspired by when things really work, but it actually scares some people. It's actually when they see you putting the effort, willing to go through the ups and downs of the process and take risks in your learning. It's what we want students to do. We don't want learning to be a linear process, because that's not reality outside of school. So it shouldn't be inside school. But it's the same thing. Are we willing to kind of model our learning? Like even without technology, I'm going to be 50 in a month, and I just started learning piano with my 8-year-old daughter, and
That's
I
great.
learned it alongside of her. And there's a little competition, like who can play I'm Just Ken better, and that's kind of something that we do together. But there's no excuse for her not to practice when she sees her dad practicing every single morning.
That's great. I do appreciate that. I appreciate your time today. It's been wonderful having you on. Been very interesting to have a conversation with you. So thank you for joining us on the
Thanks, sir.
podcast today, and I hope you make it a great day.
Thank you. Have a good day.
All right. You too. Take care.
That's a wrap on this episode of Innovator Insights. A huge thanks to George Couros for sharing his wisdom on innovation, leadership, and the future of education. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to visit our website, innovatorinsights.io. From there, you can find more episodes and subscribe to our mailing list to stay updated on the latest in technology and innovation. And if you found this discussion valuable, please share it with a friend or colleague. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.